he's not someone, just like Xi is to Trump, that Beijing can walk all over. And the White House is trying to project hardball, and it's interesting to see Bessent almost come back and relay a message that's significantly less fiery than what the president is saying.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Christian Datoc. And Christian, obviously the White House is still in a very celebratory mode to the diplomatic breakthrough in Gaza, getting all of the hostages back who are still alive, a cessation of fighting in Gaza, but they're looking toward what the next phase will be. And they're, particularly with regard to Hamas, there's some challenges there.
There are, and to quote our late dear friend, at least in terms of broadcasting on television, Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend, because we had this report of Hamas essentially executing Palestinians in Gaza from earlier this week.
Right.
There are still some doubts about the full veracity of this video. Did it occur after the ceasefire? Who exactly are these men who are being executed, even though you can clearly see them knelt and dragged, after being dragged through the streets and then shot in the head. And President Trump has now weighed in officially. He, posted a message on Truth Social Thursday afternoon, which essentially says Hamas needs to stop targeting Palestinians, or quote, "We will come in and kill them."
Right.
Now, this is a pretty stark departure from what the president was saying on Monday, where it was all positivity and optimism about the future of Gaza and the historic nature of this peace, which he has brokered. And to be quite frank, these two top negotiators in the Trump administration right now in Gaza, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, even though he's not officially working for the government,
right.
They've been telling reporters to sort of pump the brakes, because even though this feels like a seismic breakthrough, this is a phased peace plan, essentially. And at any point in time, the terrorist group that is Hamas could violate the terms and throw us back to where we were, just a few weeks ago. Obviously, the president has voiced the utmost support for Israel to go into Gaza and eliminate Hamas should the ceasefire break down. But I think the use of the word "we" here is important, because the president, his top allies have all told us an international peacekeeping operation, as outlined in that 20-point plan, would not include U.S. boots on the ground.
Right.
But the president's use of language is important here, and perhaps he's signaling to Hamas or trying to, warn them of, ramped up consequences should they not start playing ball. But seriously, this is something that I think the White House needs to weigh in on and give us clarity. Is the president generalizing, or is he thinking about a serious change in strategy about either policing the region or, ending Hamas should they violate the terms of this peace plan?
I mean, the chief bargaining chip that Hamas had was the hostages.
Right, and they're out now.
Obviously, there's still international condemnation of potential mistreatment of civilians in Gaza, but that's a very complicated matter at this point.
It is, and I think the idea that President Trump, despite his best wishes and what he told us on television as this deal was getting finalized, this isn't going to be some overnight solution. You don't just flip the lights on or off, on what's sadly a conflict, which has spanned decades at this point in time. So there were always going to be roadblocks, like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff said. There's always more work to be done. And I think this just sort of illustrates how delicate this piece is, even though, again, everyone wants to see the fighting end, and we're all sort of hoping this can come to a positive resolution sooner than later.
So on another front, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been sort of the face of the Trump economic policy more broadly, but now it looks like we're back in a sort of trade war mode with China. What's he had to say?
Well, in this case, Scott Bessent, who's frequently deployed to be sort of the whisperer to the markets, calm concerns or fears on Wall Street about any number of policies that the president either formally announces or just puts out there on Truth Social, he had a very packed day on Wednesday. He appeared at CNBC's Invest in America Forum, where he was asked about rising tension with China at length. He then held a press conference at the Treasury Department alongside Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade rep, and they sort of did a good cop, bad cop routine I would laugh if it weren't such a dire situation with serious ramifications on the global economy.
Right.
But essentially, Greer, who is a policy wonk, as we call them in D.C., came out and hammered the specifics of these export controls that China is proposing be put in place on rare earth minerals. Obviously, that would have serious downstream consequences for U.S. technologies. And Bessent, on the other hand, was kind of saying, we still see, room for negotiation here. I think this can be resolved sooner than later and in a professional manner. It's an interesting dynamic because I think Scott Bessent, of all the president's cabinet secretaries, is sort of a unicorn here. He's got, bona fides working for big-time liberal money men. I mean, he managed the funds of George Soros for a good amount of time before he had his slow move to the right, politically speaking. And he's also someone with deep, deep ties with these international businessmen and fiduciary institutions. He is someone who, outsiders, or even more specifically, if you're the Trump administration, traders or analysts on Wall Street can look to and sort of see, through the messaging slant and get an idea of what the long-term strategy is here. Because I don't think the president wants an extended trade war with China.
Right.
He is very concerned about, one, those export controls on rare earths that I just mentioned, the cancellation of the purchases of U.S. soybeans, and he's trying to go back to the well. Because to be quite frank, the Trump bombacity and threatening all caps posts on social media, even though we mock them to an extent, have been pretty effective in effectuating this tariff agenda. I think even though we're starting to see some warning signs on inflation, everyone in D.C. at least has been surprised about how effective the president has been when it comes to cajoling his foreign contemporaries to get on board with this tariff plan. And I think he's hoping that will work with China. That being said, Xi Jinping controls the second largest economy in the world behind the United States. He is certainly not a newbie leader who can be pushed around by the likes of Donald Trump.
Right.
But I think at the same time, Trump's bombacity, I hate to repeat myself, and sort of unpredictability makes Xi respect him because he's not someone, just like Xi is to Trump, that Beijing can walk all over. And the White House is trying to project hardball, and it's interesting to see Bessent almost come back and relay a message that's significantly less fiery than what the president is saying, but that's meant for Wall Street, while the president's message is meant for officials over in Beijing.
So there's been all this talk about U.S. money going to Argentina, which seems a little bit off message from an America First perspective, also considering that the government of Argentina has very much been sort of Doge on steroids. Its fiscal practices. How is the administration explaining this to people?
Well, it's complicated. We first heard news of this currency swap with Argentina about a month ago. The framework, $20 billion of a credit line in exchange for Argentine pesos, was formally announced last week. And then again, I mentioned Bessent had that event at Treasury on Wednesday.
Right.
They announced that we're actually trying to double that bailout of Argentina's farmers and to get President Milei out of his debt problems. But they're doing it in a slightly different way. They're trying to pull in funds from the private sector. Apparently, according to Secretary Bessent, they're even talking to other countries about investing sovereign wealth funds. He didn't name any countries, but you have to imagine Saudi Arabia would be involved in a potential deal like this, given how closely they've worked with, again, Jared Kushner and the Trump administration. But it's interesting because politically, Trump and Milei are certainly very closely aligned. That being said, when the Argentine president visited the White House earlier this week, Trump sort of joked, look, we're trying to do our best to help Argentina, help out their farmers. That being said, if they lose in the midterms, that money is not going anywhere. So is the president trying to, light a fire under his buddy down to the south and say, get your act together ahead of the elections later this year? Or is this serious about, one, making sure that China is not filling the hole in the canceled U.S. soybean orders by purchasing them from Argentina, taking advantage of their debt situation? And then, of course, on top of all that, you have to talk about the drug trade and the focus that the Trump administration has placed on targeting the cartels or the gangs in Venezuela in particular. And of course, Milei has taken upon himself, not only when President Trump was sworn into office in January, but throughout his entire term, of trying to take on some of these narco traffickers within Argentina's borders. That's certainly an area where there is plenty of room for collaboration, and potentially that could be playing a part into this currency swap as well.
Always looking for leverage. Thank you, Christian.
Anytime, Jim.
You can read Christian and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.